Archangel Michael's shocking act against the wives of fallen angels. Have you ever stopped to wonder just how deep the spiritual war between good and evil really goes? Beyond the stories we grew up with, beyond the familiar names and places of the Bible, there exists a layer of divine conflict so intense, so mysterious, that even the angels tremble. And in the heart of this great battle stands one figure who is both terrifying and glorious, Archangel Michael. Most people know him as the mighty warrior of God, the one who battles Satan in the Book of Revelation. But very few realize that Michael once committed an act so bold, so shocking, that it echoes through eternity. A confrontation not with demons or devils, but with the wives of the fallen angels themselves. Yes, the women who dared to unite themselves with divine beings, birthing a generation of giants and unleashing a tide of darkness that almost drowned the world. These women weren't just side characters in a forgotten chapter of history. They were pivotal players in a cosmic rebellion, and Michael's response to their existence would change the spiritual landscape forever. This isn't a tale of fantasy. It's rooted in the sacred texts, starting in Genesis, expanded in the Book of Enoch, and alluded to by Jesus Christ himself when he said, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man." The days of Noah weren't just about sin or a great flood. They were about a terrifying breach between heaven and earth. Angelic beings crossed a boundary they were never meant to cross. They descended from the heavenly realm not to fulfill God's will, but to fulfill their own lusts. And the women who welcomed them, they too stepped into a role never intended for them. Together they birthed destruction. But what happened to those women? We know the fallen angels were judged, bound in chains, cast into a pit. But the women, the wives, the mothers of the Nephilim, what was their fate? That's where Michael comes in. Scripture tells us that he was appointed to lead the charge against the Watchers, the 200 angels who abandoned their posts. But in that confrontation, there is a part often left untold. Michael did something shocking, something that should make all of us stop and reflect on the seriousness of sin, the justice of God, and the unseen consequences of spiritual rebellion. This video will take you on a journey through time, from the first pages of Genesis to the climactic visions of Revelation. We'll explore the untold stories, connect the biblical dots, and reveal how Archangel Michael didn't just fight demons. He confronted the very source of human corruption, right at its heart. And what he did to the wives of the fallen angels, it might just change the way you read the Bible forever. Are you ready to uncover a mystery that angels themselves marvel at? Let's begin. Part 1. The Days of Noah and the Sin of the Watchers. Let's begin where it all started, with a cryptic and often overlooked passage in Genesis 6. You've probably read it before, maybe even skimmed past it without giving it a second thought. But if you slow down, if you really pay attention, you'll notice that something deeply strange is going on. Something supernatural. Something dangerous. Here's what it says. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Genesis 6, 1-2. Who were these sons of God? And why did their union with human women lead to such catastrophic consequences that God decided to wipe out nearly all life on earth? Throughout church history, interpretations have varied. Some say these sons of God were simply the descendants of Seth, the godly line. But this interpretation doesn't explain what happens next. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. Genesis 6:4. These weren't ordinary children. They were giants, titans, beings of terrifying power and corruption, and their presence on the earth corrupted not just people, but all of creation. The Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text that was widely read in the early church, goes even deeper. It names these sons of God as the Watchers, a group of 200 powerful angels who were originally sent by God to watch over and guide humanity. But they betrayed their mission. They descended to Mount Hermon, made a pact with one another, and chose to take human women for themselves. Why? Lust, power, rebellion. These angels, beings of light who once stood in the presence of the Almighty, fell because they desired what was forbidden. And the women they took became their wives, the mothers of the Nephilim. These unions were not blessed, they were cursed. The Nephilim, these hybrid offspring, grew into monstrous beings, dominating the earth, teaching humans the secrets of war, sorcery, and sin. Their fathers, the fallen watchers, taught forbidden knowledge, how to make weapons, cast spells, manipulate the heavens. Human civilization advanced, but not toward God. It was running headlong into corruption. God saw the wickedness. The cries of the oppressed reached heaven. The earth was filled with violence, perversion, and idolatry, and God's heart was grieved. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. Genesis 6:5-6. This was the world of Noah. A world not just filled with sinners, but infected by unnatural unions, angelic betrayal, and dark knowledge that humans were never meant to possess. And so God decided to reset everything, to cleanse the earth with a flood. But before the waters came, something had to be done about the fallen angels and about their wives. This is where Michael, the Archangel, is summoned. One of heaven's mightiest warriors, Michael was not sent to negotiate. He was sent to bring judgment. He would not only battle the rebellious watchers, he would confront the women they had married. But before that confrontation, we need to understand who these women were, because what Michael did to them, or because of them, was no ordinary act of warfare. It was an act of divine justice that shook even the angels. Part 2. The Rise of the Wives of Fallen Angels. We often hear stories about women in the Bible. Sarah, Ruth, Esther, Mary. These were women of faith, chosen and honored by God. But the women we're about to explore, they were part of something entirely different, something dark, something forbidden. Who were the wives of the fallen angels? The Bible doesn't name them, but their legacy is written across the ancient world. They were the daughters of men, human women who, in the days before the flood, entered into unholy unions with angels. Whether they were seduced, deceived, or willingly complicit, we cannot fully know. What we do know is that their choices altered the course of history. Think about it. These women became mothers of giants. They gave birth to the Nephilim, beings so powerful, so destructive, that they nearly wiped out all human civilization. These were not just legendary creatures. They were real, and their mothers bore the shame, the pain, and the spiritual consequence of these births. But here's where things get even more disturbing. According to the Book of Enoch, these women weren't just passive participants. Many of them embraced the forbidden. The fallen angels taught them dark arts, sorcery, enchantments, the use of roots and herbs to control others. They adorned themselves with beauty-enhancing potions, jewelry, and seductive clothing that became symbols of pride and power. The fallen watchers taught them secrets from heaven, not to bless the world, but to manipulate it. These women became the first priestesses of false religions, leading others into worship of idols, spirits, and the very beings who corrupted them. They birthed giants, yes, but they also birthed ideologies, worldviews that glorified violence, sensuality, and rebellion. Their daughters passed on the corrupted bloodline. Their sons became warlords, kings of cruelty, false gods of ancient myth. Many ancient pagan cultures, from the Sumerians to the Greeks, preserved echoes of these women, goddesses of fertility, magic, seduction, and chaos. But behind the myths were real women, those who had once walked the earth, who had once carried the blood of heaven in their wombs. Women who had made a choice, and whose consequences rippled across generations. You might ask, did they know what they were doing? Did they understand the depth of the rebellion they were participating in? Some may have been deceived, tricked by the beauty and splendor of these heavenly beings. But others, many others, embraced the power. They delighted in being chosen by the sons of God. They took pride in their offspring, boasted of their connection to divine beings, and in doing so, they made themselves enemies of God. This is why their story matters, because they were not merely background figures. They were agents of corruption, vessels of unholy knowledge, and even after the flood, traces of their influence remained. So what became of them? We know what happened to their husbands, the Watchers. God ordered them to be bound in chains and cast into the abyss, reserved for judgment on the last day. But what about the women? They weren't angels. They weren't immortal. They were human. But they had crossed a spiritual boundary no human was ever meant to cross. They had mingled with the divine, not through God's will, but through defiance. And so, Archangel Michael was sent, not just to judge the Watchers, but to deal with the women who had joined in their rebellion. What did he do? That's what we're about to discover next. And I promise you, it is unlike anything you've heard before. Part 3. Archangel Michael, Heaven's Warrior and Defender. Who do you call when the created world is unraveling? When the barrier between heaven and earth has been broken, and angels have betrayed their sacred mission? When human women are birthing monsters, and violence has swallowed the world whole? You call Michael. Archangel Michael is not just another heavenly being. He is the general of heaven's armies, the champion of God's people, the one whom God appoints when the spiritual battle reaches its most desperate point. We first meet him in Scripture in the Book of Daniel, where he is called one of the chief princes, and later described as the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people. Daniel chapter 10, 13, 12:1. He is not simply an angel, he is a warrior. And not just a warrior, but the one who stands at the forefront when God's justice must pierce through the darkness. Revelation 12 gives us a stunning picture of his role in heaven. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. Revelation 12, 7-8. Michael is the one who casts Satan down. He doesn't argue, he doesn't negotiate, he fights. He defends the holiness of heaven and the will of God. But long before the final war in Revelation, Michael was already on assignment. Before the flood, before the ark, before the rain fell for the first time, Michael was sent by God to execute justice on earth. He was commissioned not only to judge the Watchers, but to restore the boundaries that had been shattered. The Book of Enoch reveals something extraordinary. When the cry of humanity reached heaven, when the earth groaned under the weight of corruption, God gave orders. And to Michael, he gave a terrifying task. Go, bind Semjaza and his associates, throw them into the valleys of the earth, cover them with rough stones, let them remain there until the day of judgment. And Enoch 10, Semjaza was the leader of the Watchers, the ringleader of the rebellion. Along with Azazel and the others, he had taken a human wife, fathered children, and unleashed forbidden knowledge. Michael was commanded to bind him and cast him into the deep places, Tartarus, the abyss, a spiritual prison beneath the earth. Imagine that moment. Michael descending with the authority of God, wielding the power of the Most High. The Watchers, once radiant angels, now cowering in terror as chains forged by divine justice bound their limbs. But here's the part we often miss. Michael didn't just deal with the angels. There were women present, the wives, the mothers, the ones who had chosen to join this rebellion. And what Michael did next would shake the heavens. Part 4. The shocking act, Michael's confrontation with the wives. Try to picture the scene. A desolate mountain range, the air thick with judgment, the sky darkening as the full weight of heaven's wrath descends. The watchers have been seized, bound, cast into the deep. The Nephilim are being destroyed, their unnatural spirits soon to become the wandering demons of the earth. And then there are the women. They stand in the aftermath, their eyes wide, some in terror, some in defiance. These were no ordinary women. They had tasted the embrace of celestial beings. They had carried the blood of heaven in their wombs. They had ruled over men through sorcery, seduction, and power. Now they watched their angelic husbands being dragged into the abyss. And here comes Michael, majestic, terrifying, clothed in holy fire. The scriptures do not record a word he spoke to them, not in Genesis, not in Enoch, and perhaps that silence is its own judgment. But the Book of Enoch gives us a glimpse of their fate. The women, though not bound like their husbands, were not left untouched. Michael's confrontation was not with sword or flame, but with decree, with finality. They cried, they mourned, they begged for their husbands. And now to the watchers, who have sent you to intercede for them, who had been of heaven, say, "You were in heaven, but its secret things had not been revealed to you. You knew worthless ones, and in the hardness of your hearts you made known to women that through these mysteries they work much evil." 1 Enoch 16. Did you catch that? It was through these women that the watchers extended their evil influence. The women were not innocent. They became carriers of corrupted wisdom, vessels of spiritual ruin. What was Michael's shocking act? He cut them off. He severed the link. He decreed by heaven's authority that no prayer would be heard for the watchers, that no mercy would be granted, and that the women who had joined themselves to these angels would bear the consequences. Some traditions say they were driven into exile. Others suggest they were struck with barrenness, madness, or consumed by the judgment that fell upon their children. But even more chilling is the spiritual legacy they left behind. According to Enoch, the spirits of the Nephilim, after their bodies were destroyed in the flood, became the unclean spirits that wander the earth, the demons. And those demons, forever bitter, forever hateful, remember their human mothers. This is where Michael's act becomes more than a moment in time. It becomes a line in the sand. Michael didn't destroy the women with fire. He didn't chain them as he did the angels, but he ensured that their influence would never again corrupt the heavens. Their line was ended. Their role in the divine order was closed. Heaven would not be infiltrated again. The women who thought they had ascended were cast down. Their legacy, once proud and mystical, became cursed and whispered about in ancient myths. And what made this act so shocking? It wasn't the violence. It wasn't the judgment. It was the mercy that never came. These women had married the divine. And yet heaven had no sympathy for them. Why? Because they had knowingly joined a rebellion against the Creator. And Michael, unshakable, righteous, loyal, delivered the sentence without wavering. For us today, this moment should send a chill down our spine, because it reminds us that not all rebellion is loud and obvious. Sometimes it looks like a love story. Sometimes it looks like beauty, wisdom, enchantment. But when it defies God's order, when it blurs the line between the holy and the profane, it becomes a crime of eternal consequence. Michael's confrontation was not just with ancient women. It was with the very idea that creation could elevate itself above the Creator, and he crushed it. Part 5. Redemption, Judgment, and the Return of Days like Noah. When Jesus walked the earth, he didn't just speak about his kingdom. He didn't only heal and teach, he warned. And one of his most haunting warnings echoes the ancient past, calling our attention back to the very days we've just explored. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. Matthew 24:37. Let that sink in. Jesus didn't compare the last days to just any time in history. He pointed to the darkest, most corrupted age, the time when angels fell, when women took them as husbands, when giants roamed the earth, and wickedness had soaked every corner of creation. Why? Because what happened then wasn't a one-time event. It was a pattern, a spiritual cycle, a rebellion that, though buried by the flood, still lingers in the shadows. The Book of Jude says, "And the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day." Jude 1:6. That judgment is still coming. And here's what we need to grasp. The days of Noah were marked by the breakdown of boundaries, the boundary between heaven and earth, the boundary between the spiritual and the physical, between male and female, divine and human, holy and unholy. Those same boundaries are under attack today. We live in a time where everything is being blurred. Gender, identity, truth, morality. Even the very idea of God's created order is being questioned. This is not just cultural confusion, it's spiritual warfare, and it mirrors the rebellion that Michael once stood against. The influence of the wives of the fallen angels has not entirely vanished. Their spirit lives on in systems that seduce, in ideologies that exalt power over purity, in movements that glorify rebellion over righteousness. In Revelation 17, we see a terrifying image, a woman dressed in purple and scarlet riding a beast. She is called Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots. She holds a golden cup, but it's filled with abominations. Her beauty deceives, her power seduces, but her end is destruction. This figure is not just political, she is spiritual. She embodies the legacy of those ancient women who turned their backs on God's design. And once again, who will confront her? It is Michael. Because the final war isn't fought by human armies. The final war is fought in the heavenlies. And Michael, heaven's great warrior, once more will rise. Revelation 12:7 tells us of that coming day. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. He is still fighting, not with swords forged by man, but with the authority of the Most High. And the enemy is not just Satan. It's everything he has built, every deception, every false religion, every corrupted seed planted since the days of Noah. But here's the good news. The enemy will not win. The Nephilim were destroyed. The Watchers were bound. The wives were silenced. And in the end, every trace of that rebellion will be wiped away by the hand of God. You and I, we are living in the final chapters. We are witnesses to the unraveling of the world, but also participants in the greatest spiritual victory ever told. And the question is no longer, what did Michael do? But rather, where do we stand? Because the same Michael who stood then stands now, and the same battle that was fought before the flood is being fought today, in the spirit, in the culture, in our hearts. Conclusion. Now that you've seen the full story, what do you make of it? The tale of Archangel Michael's shocking act against the wives of the fallen angels is not a forgotten myth. It's not ancient superstition. It's a warning, a truth, a call to awareness. We live in a time where the supernatural is being mocked, where biblical warnings are ignored, and where compromise is dressed in the language of love and freedom. But there is a line that should never be crossed. A line that, once shattered, opens the door to judgment. Those women in Genesis crossed it. Willingly or not, they united with heaven's rebels and gave birth to destruction. And God, in his justice, sent Michael, not just to punish the angels, but to ensure that humanity would never again attempt to merge with what was forbidden. Michael's silence toward the women was deafening. He spoke no comfort. He offered no hope. Because when you join a rebellion against God, when you twist his design for power or pleasure, you remove yourself from his protection. This is why the cross is so beautiful. Because while God's justice is fierce, his mercy is deeper still. The same God who sent Michael in judgment also sent Jesus in grace. The blood of Jesus reaches further than the rebellion of the Watchers. It cleanses deeper than the sin of those ancient women. And it opens the door to a new creation where the boundaries are not broken, but fulfilled. So here's the truth. You don't have to repeat their fate. You don't have to fall for the deception of the forbidden. You don't have to walk the path of spiritual compromise. You were made for something greater. You were made to stand, like Michael, in obedience to the king, to fight for righteousness, to reject the seductive lies of false power, and to wait for the day when heaven's armies ride again, because that day is coming. And when it does, the world will once again see Michael rise, not in mystery, not in silence, but in final, blazing victory. Until then, choose the side of heaven, live holy, stay awake. And remember, the shocking act of Michael was not just against ancient rebels, it was a message to us all. God is not mocked, judgment is real, but so is redemption for those who turn to Jesus. Now is the time. Choose well.